here as the chair of the commission. Jennifer, you're first on my screen.
Good morning, Jennifer Deck Samuelson, Chair of Vermont State Board of Education.
Thank you. Peter?
Peter Conlon, representative from the Vermont House.
Anne?
Ann Cummings, Vermont Senate.
And Craig?
Craig Bolio, Tax Commissioner.
Great, thank you. And as I said, Zoe and Nicole Mace will be in and out. Nicole hopefully in, but may not be able to. So before we get started, can I have a motion to approve the minutes from the last steering group meeting?
So moved.
Thank you, Peter.
second.
Jennifer, a second. Thanks. Any discussion or things that need to be updated or amended? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Or nays? Okay, minutes are approved. If folks, before we do public comment, if folks could just take a quick look, the agenda is really planning our October meeting. Are there any amendments to the agenda? All right. Any members of the public joining us today who would like to comment before we get started can raise your hand or unmute. Don't see any hands right now. We will have another opportunity at the end of the meeting. So we'll just move into discussion of our October meeting. I did want to kick it off by acknowledging and seeing what the steering group, if anything, would like to do about the fact that having agreed to the first Monday of every month, our October meeting falls on October 7th, which is a significant anniversary day for some members. It has been brought up once by a member of the public. And I just wanted to open the conversation with the steering group. I don't know to what extent meetings are going to fall on significant events. It impacts both the potential ability of members of the commission to join. There was also the concern raised because we will by then start to rotate location and intend to have an input session. And the concern was raised about whether or not that would impact the participation. Be interested in folks' thoughts on that. Yeah, Jennifer.
Well, I think for me, and probably I'm not alone in this, the balance is, we'd like to establish some continuity with our meetings so that members don't have to, figure out when and where we're going to be. But on the other hand, I am sensitive to the fact that, this is a holiday and Day of Remembrance. I have no objection to moving the meeting just so that, we do remain as accessible as we can to members of the public.
I don't have a problem either moving it.
So, and happy to hear input, Peter or Craig. I will also just point out, looking ahead, the week after the 7th is Indigenous Peoples Day. So that is not a holiday for every organization, but it kind of raises that challenge, is balancing that. So I would just put that in the room if the steering group is thinking about moving it.
Could I just make a suggestion? Because I think we landed on Mondays because as we go into, the legislative session, Mondays are going to be an easy day for us to meet because there won't be conflicts. But we're not there yet. And I wonder, what if we just did it on Tuesday, the 8th instead?
That's what I was thinking.
I will be unavailable for the duration of Tuesday, the 8th. There is a working session for inclusive leadership that has been planned for quite a while for me that I need to do for my professional hat. That I'm only one member, but
How about the 9th?
Well, and I wonder, I mean, because others may have issues or not issues that, I mean, we'll wonder if we do a poll to just say, hey, is there availability not on a Monday over the next course of the week of the 7th and 14th to move it?
right. I think my sense is the steering group either needs to decide we're holding it and keeping to our schedule, or we're sending a doodle poll out to reschedule. Because I think even picking a different Monday may prove challenging. The only possibility, if we were just to slide something in tentatively, is that, and this would be tentative, but some members, or we did kind of loosely designate the third Monday of every month as a committee meeting date. So perhaps people were holding that, and then we could move it to the 21st. Even that would probably require a confirmation of the group, but maybe not a full doodle. So really it would be, is the desire of the steering group to move from October 7th. The 21st would avoid both of those dates, and maybe that's
Are we
useful.
in the morning on the 7th?
We would be in the afternoon.
Okay, then I'm good.
I mean, if we've heard concerns raised from commission members, I don't have an issue moving the date.
I don't either.
Anybody else opposed to moving the date?
I'm not opposed, and I think that if it doesn't conflict with other committee meetings, I have blocked off the 1st and 3rd throughout my calendar, so that's probably a good alternative as well.
Okay. So I wonder if this group can, I think, Suzanne, I would be proposing that we did this actually with the timing of today's meeting, move the calendar date to the 21st. And if anyone from the commission can't attend, then it would prompt us to send a doodle poll out. So it's sort of like a soft reschedule. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So the other thing that would do, and then I'm going to follow it up directly with one of the challenges that I think is not new to anyone. But one of the things that would do is give 2 more weeks for agency folks to find our location, because we are starting to rotate. And the communication and engagement group met this morning, gave some updates, setting the ball in motion for the request for proposals for the consultant, but also agreed that we should hold an input session. Even if we don't have the benefit of a consultant, we should hold an input session in October. We talked a little bit about how the engagement group might plan that, and it gives that group 2 more weeks to plan that input session. So that might be helpful. The only thing that I would then immediately follow that up with is just the general sense of urgency. The commission has talked about it, the finance subcommittee has talked about it, and I'd say in particular, our ability as a commission to hear the recommendations of the finance subcommittee in time to adopt them by December is going to come really quickly. And I think it was the feeling of actually both full commission members and subcommittee members that having 2 full meetings to discuss any recommendations is probably the minimum that we would need. So that would give us October 21st, November, whatever the date would be in November. I don't have my calendar in front of me. And then it would potentially have the December date. So it would give the group three meetings to discuss, and actually moving it to the 21st in October would give the finance subcommittee additional dates, because Anne or Craig, does the subcommittee have another meeting date scheduled yet?
I just got to find it, but I believe we do. I've been trying to get a hold of Representative Kornheiser. It's kind of awkward because she's not in on these discussions. Come on.
I also, in case, I'm copied on a couple communication between Emily and I think that they had a date, but then I don't know that
We
they
did
do.
a doodle poll. We couldn't
Okay.
come to one.
I have a
I
have
am
it
not,
October 3rd. Is that what you
Oh.
see, Ann?
let me check 1, 2. I don't have that, but that could well be it.
Oh, that might be, never mind. No, that's
No.
something else. I misread.
I can't read this calendar.
I'm actually not certain there's another date set
I'm
at
not
this
either.
moment,
We did a
because the
doodle
doodle poll went
poll,
out.
but I haven't gotten a response back on that, which has been why I've been trying to get a hold of Emily to find out, to impress the urgency.
Yeah, and I think the last I looked, or the last I was copied on scheduling, I think Maureen and Emily were going back and forth on whether or not they would do another doodle. I think there was a date and then someone wasn't available, and so I don't know yet if they are sending out another doodle. Anyway, that's not something we can necessarily answer today, although we
I will
can.
keep
Yeah.
calling her today, see if I can get a hold of her. I think she's finished work for the summer, so that should free things up.
And we've just bought ourselves 2 more weeks, which is probably helpful. So I wanted to kick off the planning of the now October 21st, tentatively, meeting. I guess I would just, the 2 things on my mind from our last couple of meetings, in addition to sort of the standing committee updates, agenda items, is maybe it's a deeper update from the finance subcommittee, who hopefully will have met a few times by then. Maybe one of you could give, I don't know that there's much of an update since the last time. One conversation that I, just as an audience member, heard you all talking about was the idea that you as a subcommittee were going to spend some time looking at, this is my word, but a menu of the suggested solutions that have been raised in the past, just sort of acknowledging that this is not the first time that these issues have been discussed, and you as a committee were going to put them all in one place so that you can look at them together. I don't know if that's how you'll ultimately approach the work, but I wondered if there is an ability for the full commission to hear the subcommittee's whatever comes out of that conversation. In other words, getting some ideas to the full commission as quickly as possible. And then I also know that we continue to hear sort of what reports are you looking at in order to make these decisions, or what previous legislation, data. And the faster we can identify what that is and get it in the hands of the commission, so that's what's on my mind.
And I know that the Ways and Means Committee spent 10 weeks looking at these issues, and failed to come to a conclusion because they ran out of time getting the data they needed. So I was hoping that Emily could give us an update as to what they were looking at in finance structure mostly, and what issues they ran up against and what their thinking was, and so we don't have to recreate a lot of that wheel, and find out what went on there. But we also have a structure kind of subcommittee out there, and I have a feeling those 2 at some point may need to mesh. Yeah, because I'm not sure we're going to solve this by just changing the financing.
No,
Without
I think that's something the commission is really trying to help the public understand, honestly, is the charge is as complex as it is because of the complexity. I think what I was trying to get at is, I maybe I'll ask it a different way. Is October 21st, is it reasonable to expect that the subcommittee might have preliminary ideas? So again, working backwards from the goal,
Yeah.
the requirement is December preliminary recommendations regarding the finance system. That's the charge in the
Yeah.
legislation. There's an acknowledgement on the part of the full commission that the amount of study and understanding structures and governance, they're all in the charge for a reason. And the idea that those would be completely studied and deep engagement with the community by December. Though that's the tension that we're dealing with, is those two things.
And
So to get us to those preliminary recommendations, does the finance subcommittee feel like it will have something for the commission to chew on the 21st, or is that too early to expect?
I'm going to punt to the tax commissioner. I think we can report on things that have been looked at in the legislative forum and places we think we need more information. We're having so much trouble scheduling a meeting. I think at some point we're going to just need to say, we've got to go forward if everybody can't be there, because there's no way between now and December that we're going to be able to schedule enough meetings that everybody with everybody's busy schedule can be at. And yeah, there's just some structural issues here that are not making this easy.
And I think that the subcommittee's asked to start with sort of an overview of the current system and data. So I don't know how many meetings that will take, but at
Right.
least one, right? So let's say I'm sort of guessing it'll take more than one. So let's say two for that. And then we've got 5 weeks to try to chew on the current status and then do some review on recommendations. So I guess in my mind, it probably feels a little early to do like an official sort of report out of a first draft. But I also think with the timing and sort of lack of runway that we have, that one of the approaches the subcommittee might talk about is bringing things back to the full commission earlier than it otherwise would have if there was more time.
Mhm.
I don't want to speak for the whole subcommittee, but I think that's probably one idea worth considering. So October 21st sort of feels aggressive to have it be like
Yes.
here's a real first draft, but certainly, I mean, if I'm hoping we can get somewhere in 5 weeks.
I wonder if it's enough to frame the agenda item as finance subcommittee discussion of, and we don't even have to say discussion of recommendations. It's either going to be you all presenting that overview of the current system and the data that you have or is missing, or you're going to be far enough along that it's something more solid to chew on. And I think either way, it's a substantive
Yeah.
agenda item, sounds like.
Megan,
I agree.
when you first introduced the topic, what was running through my head was what it sounded like you were thinking about was, could we get a presentation on sort of all of the proposals that have been
Yes.
kicked around and why they were not implemented? So, for example, why did we not move to an income-based tax system? Why did we not do what other sort of recommendations have popped up over the years, not just in the 2024 legislative session? And which I think would be a good grounding and a good place for all of us to get more information. I don't know how
And
doable that is.
I think that Julia Richter, if we asked, could give us a good presentation of the myriad of graphs that the income tax summer study looked at, and why all the moving levers in there, and why it isn't as simple as it sounds.
Okay, and I appreciate that for that one particular one, but really these were ultimately policy decisions that were
Right.
made as to why we didn't do them, and JFO will not tell us policy
No,
reasons
but
for
they
why
can
we did
give
things.
us the data as to what we saw. That was the basis of no one on that commission putting in legislation for it to change.
So I'll just say an answer and then Jennifer, yes, Peter, that is exactly what I was thinking, partially because it's the picture I had in my mind listening to the finance committee, but also because I think it would be instructive. You know, one of the underlying comments that have come through the commission is that we are not starting from scratch in terms of ideas that have been floated, and surfacing them, finding which still have merit, which do not, and why is probably useful because it moves the conversation forward. Jennifer.
Yeah, well, I'm listening to this conversation and I realize, I mean, there's a certain amount of education that I think needs to happen within the Education Finance, excuse me, committee. But there's also education that needs to happen within the full commission and certainly the larger public. So I think to the extent that there's information out there, to me, it feels really important that that information is shared with the committee. But I'm also wondering if there's a way to kind of streamline this, because I think, you know, are we basically asking this information to be presented twice, you know, once to the Education Finance Committee and again to the full commission, because I'm sure commission members are going to have questions that may be similar to questions that people on the Ed Finance Committee might have. So I just wanted to raise that because I feel like whatever work the Ed Finance Committee can get done between now and October 21st, the more the better. But I also think that we're going to need to carve out a big chunk of our October 21st meeting to really have this education for the full commission and the greater public.
I apologize. I'm
So-
coming in a little midstream to this conversation. My apologies for being late. Just to make sure I'm up to speed, so we're pushing back the commission meeting to October 21st. Okay.
Yes.
And then the question I think that we're discussing is the role of, or the benefit of the Ed Finance Subcommittee doing some of this knowledge building work outside of the commission meeting. Is that what the discussion is?
I think it's evolving to, it started with what can the full commission expect the agenda item to be on the 21st, and sort of like what can we reasonably expect the finance committee to have by then? And then sort of you kind of heard from there. I don't think you must much is my point. Like, I think the finance committee has talked through some ways that they are making sense. Jennifer's acknowledged that full commission members probably need that sense making as well. Part of me also wonders, the finance committee may do that look back, and they may have preliminary thoughts on why. I guess maybe that's here's why that didn't work, or here's why we don't recommend spending time on that and I don't know, maybe they won't get that far. I think they're going to be progressing along their work, and whatever we receive in October will be based on wherever they are. It may just be information sharing, because it may be that that's the place they're at. I think that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. It sounds like there's a couple things for the Education Finance Subcommittee to look at. One is an analysis of our current education finance system. And I know we have a request for specific data analysis that we'll bring forward. But then there's also the review of prior policy proposals and the reason why we may not have moved forward with them in the past. And then if we did, identifying to what degree those have been evaluated. I think that's a very helpful framing. And I think as we as we look back in a retrospective way, or retrospectively, there's also the conversation of have things changed since that time or that decision was made, would be something we would ask the subcommittee to review and evaluate to see if there is a need or an interest or an opening to revisit that. And then the only third part that I would call out that I'm not sure we've discussed yet are new ideas as well, right? So ideas that maybe are not new nationally, but maybe we haven't looked at them within the context of the state of Vermont. And I think as part of that conversation of not prejudging any one strategy, being able to put it out on the table, but then to say, here might be some considerations around why that may or may not be feasible in Vermont, so that there is that comprehensive data set. So kind of our current data, what we've entertained in the past, and then I think national strategies would be important to bring into the conversation with the commission.
Thanks, Zoe. Craig, and then also thanks. I just wanted to acknowledge Nicole did join us, so that's great. Thank you.
I'm just
Go ahead,
bouncing
Craig.
around the idea of the why we didn't do it before. And then Peter, what you ultimately, these were policy decisions, right? And so part of me is just wondering about how to frame that, and maybe it's a semantic piece, but I could also see if we're trying to answer a question like why didn't it get done before, that there might be strong disagreement within the commission about why things didn't happen. Or I mean, within Ann and Peter, you guys know the bodies are not always completely aligned also. So I mean, there was a different way you framed it, Megan, of maybe does the committee recommend spending more time on it now, right? Like maybe that's a better question than why didn't it happen before? Because I feel like why didn't it happen before could drag us down some rabbit holes that would not be super productive.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Craig. And in some ways, it's also why I think the sooner things can be put in front of the commission, the better, because it is going, we will have our best chance of making recommendations if the commission can speak in one voice. And that's going to be really difficult for exactly the reason that you stated. And so I think the intention, at least from my standpoint, and also kind of what I observed just as an observer in the finance committee, I think there is a desire to surface it all. Kind of, I think I even heard someone say everything is on the table. So what are the ideas? It is helpful to know what were the discussions back when they were, what are the new ideas? That's exactly what we're here for, but also what were the existing ones? So I agree. And my only push, frankly, to the finance committee to have as much of a discussion as we can in October is because I think it's going to take multiple discussions of the commission to have a chance of, I don't know if the commission will unanimously adopt, but we are in the strongest position the closer we can get to consensus. And I'm just acknowledging it could take a while to get there.
Could we invite Representative Kornheiser, who is chairing finance, to the committee? I mean,
yeah, I think that I can reach out to her. I think that is, I was thinking the same thing, and just in terms of moving dates and such.
Yep.
Nicole, before you came on, the steering group, this group did look at the date because of the challenge that's been raised around the 7th, and also the fact that the following Monday is Indigenous Peoples Day, and the idea that folks had held loosely the 1st and 3rd. There's a tentative decision on behalf of the steering group to move the meeting to the 21st. When Suzanne and Maureen send out that invite, if anyone declines it, that will signal that we need to do a doodle poll for scheduling. So that's just the one piece that I think we got to before you joined. Okay. Yeah, Zoe.
Megan, I think you brought up a really important point, which is consensus building will take time for the full commission. And I think that's really the nature of this conversation, is how do we make sure that we're bringing everyone along through this discussion? So I think as the Education Finance Subcommittee meets, maybe there's an opportunity for them to be able to provide a kind of a mini presentation, right? That we would ask and encourage commission members to log into to get some of that background knowledge. Because I think there's a way to intentionally structure it to share knowledge and learning throughout this process. It is a way that not only supports the general public, but we could also provide some encouragement for the commission members to join in on that committee meeting to learn kind of where we are. And I think in doing some work recently with the pre-K committee, I think that's kind of what starts to happen when you have different subgroups. People, when you come together, they're really interested to learn about what the conversations were in the subgroups, but there's a lot of value in trying to think about how you bring that together early on as possible.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'll just-
Jennifer.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Zoe. And I'm just noticing that we've got a couple of commission members, sitting in and listening to our meeting. So I think it's a really good point to invite commission members to attend other committee meetings, because I think that would help to build that information gathering sooner and, get people thinking about it sooner so that we can start having the conversation sooner.
Do they get the minutes, the full commission? Do they get the minutes from each of the subcommittees?
No, but they're posted online.
They're posted, yeah.
We would have to warn the subcommittee meetings as a full commission meeting if you anticipated that there would be the majority of the full commission members.
Even if we're just listening?
I would want to just double check that with legal. I mean, I think it would be okay, but I would double check with our general counsel.
Okay.
So I think, let me make an attempt at revoicing what I think we are looking at then for the 21st, because maybe it's one agenda item in parts, which is the Finance Committee presenting to the full commission. And this is somewhat dependent on how far they get in this work, but presentation on the proposals, solutions, policy, whatever word you want to use, what's been considered in the past, and what have been the various discussions around that, what new ideas are on there, or are around that you've considered. Maybe in addition to my first comment about past, is our thinking different about any one of those given the context we're in now. So I think it's a deeper than just an update from the finance subcommittee to the full commission so that the commission can start engaging in the conversation. Nicole.
Thanks, and apologize for being late. My hope would be that by October 21st, the Finance Committee can produce some initial recommendations. Giving all that you just talked about as background in terms of why it arrived at recommendations, but those of us representing the field on that committee have been pretty hopeful that clarity will emerge early in the budgeting process. And if it's just, here's a laundry list of things that have been considered over the years and that may be new, I think that doesn't actually put any pressure on the Finance Committee to start to really engage and evaluate and identify. So I appreciate the discussion around moving the full commission meeting to October 21st. My hope would be those 3 weeks or additional 2 weeks give that committee time to really dig in and start to identify, here are 3 options that we think we could bring forward as a recommendation for discussion at the commission. If we don't do that, then I find it highly improbable that the commission will be able to give clarity at its meeting the first week of November, which really is what we're we can, although the recommendations aren't due until December, if they're not made earlier, we will have missed an opportunity to influence the budgeting process this fiscal year, for next fiscal year. So I mean, I'm just, it sounded like it was more just like, here's all the things. I would prefer that the ask of the finance committee be, bring us your recommendations.
I would much prefer that as well, just as I don't even, to me, there's nothing wrong with putting early recommendations from the finance committee in front of the commission. The worst that's going to happen is they're going to say, or I don't know. I think we're going to need as much time as possible to discuss them. And I think that I was at first nervous about changing the date, but I actually think it gives the finance committee more time. And that means that the finance committee should produce additional work. And I think even if they're preliminary, we know that any recommendation has to be adopted by the full commission. We're not pretending that that it will be a done deal, but I think the quicker the commission can hear, the better. Peter.
I was just rereading a little bit the charge to the finance subcommittee. And while it is in existence for the length of the time of the commission, it does specifically call out recommendations for the 2025 legislature, and it specifically calls out cost containment strategies. And, so probably the more specific we can be with the subcommittee, the better. And maybe that might be the area where they are first prepared to sort of have that conversation, rather than reevaluating the entire school finance system.
Thanks, Peter. Nicole?
Thanks. Yeah, that was what I was getting at in my comment, that it be bringing the cost containment recommendations forward for the October 21st meeting. That seems, if it's not happening by then, we shouldn't be starting with a rewrite of the funding formula. The legislature has given us a task to try to impact the budget that will be presented in March. We have a letter from the governor painting a pretty bleak picture, but not providing a lot of clear solutions. It's this committee's role to put some stuff on the table, and I think the sooner we do that, the better. But yeah, I was not talking about rewriting the funding formula by October 21st.
Zoe?
So I had another point, but just to follow up that in terms of rewriting the funding formula. So there is some specificity I think will be needed for people to understand if it's viable or not. So I think when you're saying bring forward short-term cost containment strategies, what is your view of what would be included in that?
I think there have been many strategies that have been discussed previously, things such as excess spending thresholds. There are other sort of smaller things that are perhaps more easily enacted or making permanent.
Yeah, and I'm asking only because there's some specific opportunity over the next few weeks to kind of get some ground up input, right? So as the Agency of Education is moving into the next phase of the Listen and Learn Tour, we're doing regional planning. And that's including education leaders from superintendents and principals, curriculum directors, business managers, school board members. And is there an opportunity to provide kind of some concrete initial insights around what would be most beneficial to explore, or what questions they might have around specific considerations? We're starting these tomorrow, so it's a little premature, but I do think that is a mechanism where we can do some early exploration from the ground up around what would be most beneficial for us to explore as a commission in terms of some of these short-term cost containment strategies.
So that also reminds me, this is a bit tangential, but it is potentially another standing agenda item. We've talked a lot about the amount, yes, there is the Communication and Engagement Committee, and they are going to be deeply looking at doing this on behalf of the commission. And there are a lot of other opportunities happening, not just through the agency, but for example, the Curriculum Leaders Association, right? They have a meeting in a week. They want some input. I've been approached by the Vermont Council of Special Ed Administrators. They want an opportunity.
Right.
We could also plan in every meeting, probably right after our committee updates, for just a really succinct update from anyone who has had an input opportunity by the time we're sitting down. So Zoe, on the 21st, you can say, I've had X number of input sessions. Here are the themes. I'd be able to say, I met with special ed directors. Here are the themes. It doesn't put, I don't think it puts any undue weight or expectation on any one of those updates. It just surfaces that feedback to the commission. I think that's a useful thing to do moving forward. So I just wanted to say that to me, because otherwise we're going to miss some of these opportunities that are happening. Business officials and superintendents will have had now, with the move of the date, they'll have had a meeting together, which is another opportunity for them to share input, probably a really important one, given that it's school business officials, right? So I do think adding that into all of our agendas would be helpful. It doesn't preclude the rest of the conversation about looking at preliminary recommendations, but it might also help with those recommendations. So I just wanted to put that out there.
So I think what we're landing on is to have the Education Finance Subcommittee present preliminary recommendations by the October 21st commission.
Okay, if these are short-term recommendations, not long-term changes, we've got a pretty limited ability. We can do excess spending thresholds. We can double your tax rate if you spend $10 more than next year. I've heard we can claw back. We can just say, and we've done that once, we're only going to level fund it. If you vote budgets over level funding, too bad. They're pretty draconian, and they don't tell us what the impact on the schools is going to be. But I'm pretty sure that those kinds of recommendations are going to come up, and they might very well pass. Because in the short term, if what you're talking about is short-term cost containment, unless somebody gets really creative, there isn't a whole lot out there that I've heard. Maybe somebody will be very creative. We've got to get through this year, but I think any kind of structural change, either to the financing or tax system or to the delivery system, is going to take more time and definitely more thought. And I know I've got one district or supervisory union that has recommended closing 2 schools, repurposing another one. I think it might be helpful for us to hear from them as to, because this is a decision the school board has made. We think this would let us function better.
So, Anne, I don't, especially that last point, it will be instructive to hear from folks. I just want to be clear, we're not trying to come to the conclusion right now about what our options are or aren't. I think we're just trying to give ourselves an on-ramp to figure out. And the finance subcommittee may or may not agree with the conclusion that there's nothing we could do right now. So I just want to, I think we're trying to set ourselves up to get there as opposed to decide right now what's possible and not. Nicole.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best we can hope for is to influence the budgeting process this year, recognizing that structural change takes much longer than that. And I do think it's useful given that that everyone on the commission has received the memo that was developed by the associations that was attempting to give folks involved in the budgeting process, sort of laying out the different cost centers and the different levers within their control at the local level. None of this is easy. Closing a school, is it not easy? Negotiating a hard contract is not easy. Reducing personnel, not easy, right? But those are really the options that are on the table in terms of decisions that will lower the cost containment. Gimmicks out of the legislature, like we're going to double tax you if you spend more, haven't worked. They usually get repealed within the first month of the legislative session because they're not adequately modeled or understood, as you said, Anne. So I think when we talk about cost containment, to me, it's how do we support the fields in making the hard decisions that need to be made in order to affect the budget outcomes, and what tools can we give them so that, and what support and backup can be brought when communities have to grapple with what does it mean to actually employ fewer people? What does it mean to have a hard bargaining around compensation? What does it mean to have health insurance benefits that we actually don't have any control over anymore because they're set at the state level? We can dance around all that, but those are the issues that we have to contend with pretty quickly.
They are.
And I think the best thing we could hope for is the commission identifying, here are the cost containment levers that we think need to be pulled this coming budget cycle, and here's the support that we're going to give folks at the local level in pulling them, and lay the groundwork for the bigger picture conversations.
I would encourage us also to ask that the Education Finance Subcommittee consider how the short-term cost containment strategies will impact longer-term structural reform. And we've established a framework looking at equity, educational quality, and sustainability as our guiding principles by which to evaluate policy proposals. And I think staying true to that is going to be important. And as we look at some of these short-term cost containment strategies, I do think it's important for us to put that on the table and itemize what we know and what we don't know in terms of implementation challenges by October 21st, because that's then where we need to spend some time around those implementation challenges and thinking around how those strategies could be structured in a way that are viable. And we begin to model what that potential impact could be on that strategy in the kind of the outliers across the state, if that makes sense. But I think I would say, encourage the committee to document as opposed to make decisions, right? About, oh, this is too difficult to implement because of some of the challenges. Go ahead and document. That's something that we would need to look at and allow that broader time frame to operationalize some of those challenges and think about, to Nicole's point, what type of support or additional guidance might be needed in order to make that viable and in alignment with the guiding principles that have been established.
Thanks, Zoe. Others? So one of the things that this also made me, a couple of you have referenced things that should be put in front of, and actually we should talk about, do they get first put cohesively in front of the finance committee and then the full commission? One of them is the memo from the education organizations about cost drivers. That you just shared, Nicole. I do think that would be important. It's possible that folks have tangentially read it, but it should just sort of be entered into the record, and everyone I'm sort of envisioning actually, I would reach out to Emily, who's chairing the finance subcommittee. I know she's working on a date. And so in prompting coming out of the steering group, here's the ask of the finance committee. Here are the documents that we think would be helpful. So I am hearing that joint memo. We've been asked repeatedly about just sort of existing legislation. So Act 46, Act 127, what else? Can the steering group help me generate that list of documents? Because then I would also have us send in advance of the 21st, all of those documents to the to the full commission so that they can read them all in advance. It's not because individual members aren't familiar with each of them, but I do think a document review is a reasonable ask. So Nicole and then Jennifer.
I also think the governor's letter to the field should be required reading for the finance committee.
Yep.
But I'm questioning why the finance committee would be spending time reviewing Act 46 and other related. That to me feels like full commission work, because again, I think the timeline for finance is tight and it is narrow. It's focused on how can we influence the FY26 budgeting process. We should all, as the entire commission, be familiar with 46, 173, 127, whatever the other acts are that folks feel strongly about. And I think a full commission conversation around what worked well, what didn't work well for each of those major pieces of legislation makes sense. But I worry about, again, the finance committee having to process all of that information. We don't have a meeting on the books. I want us to focus on the budgeting cycle, which I think the folks who are on the committee and in the room are very familiar with at least the last decade of legislation and how it has or hasn't worked, but are very familiar with the budgeting process and the state of the ed fund and what pressures need to be balanced as we think about the short term. Again, I just want that committee has got to be focused like a laser on what can we come up with for short term, if anything.
Jennifer.
I'll save my comment. Thanks.
Okay. I mean, I think from my standpoint, with the exception of Emily, everyone on the finance committee is eventually going to be sent these documents, whether they're choosing to review them before their core work or before the full commission is sort of irrelevant, frankly, to me. I think that what I'm trying to make sure the commission can honestly say, or I should say, the reason behind being clear about the fact that we on the commission are reviewing all of this is because the law asks us to, and members of the public have said, you can't do anything, commission, until you insert thing to have viewed. And so I think it's important for us to be able to say to the public, yes, we have taken a look at existing legislation, because I would also argue that for things like Act 173 or Act 77, more programmatic legislation, the question isn't so much how did those work, although that is a very relevant thing for us to understand. But the bigger question for those is our funding system has to make sure that it allows systems to implement those things. So that's, for me, that's why those things. 127 and Act 46 arguably touch on some of the financial things. So I'm simply getting at, I would like to be able to reach out to the chair of the finance subcommittee with a concrete ask of the subcommittee. And it sounds like that ask is to bring preliminary recommendations, because you all can decide what those are, but bring preliminary recommendations to the full commission on the 21st. That we would make sure that they had the VASBO memo, VSA, VASBO, the ed organization's cost drivers memo, the governor's letter. What else? What else does the committee need? And it's only so that I can sort of make it really concrete here's what you need. I guess the finance committee itself can decide what else it needs. I am a little bit worried about the committee deciding 2 minutes in or 2 meetings in that they need some piece of data. And so if there's something that you all know the group needs, it might help to surface it now.
I think we've captured the data needs. And my thought would be that's when the meeting is set, we're presenting kind of the response to that request. So we can start from there. And then I'm sure there'll be additional requests that we'll need to further analyze in the subsequent meeting.
Great.
But I think they've been pretty clearly articulated, those data requests.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, we're coming to the end of our time. And I think that's okay, because there really is one agenda item for the 21st, and that's to review and discuss preliminary recommendations. Obviously, we'll have our standing agenda items. Is there anything else that the steering group feels we should be thinking about or putting on the agenda for the next meeting? Nicole.
I mean, I don't know how long our commission meeting is, but I do think it is important to post those materials that you referenced, Megan, in terms of prior acts to the commission's website and have a conversation around, we're not going to launch a study of Act 46, for example, as a commit. Like, we don't have the capability to do that, and that is not really our charge. But I believe we should spend time as a commission talking through. And so I think, maybe it's just a preliminary discussion at the next meeting around how are we going to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to fully understand the purpose of those acts, what was achieved or not achieved. Just so I would say, I don't want to get into it on the 21st. We probably won't have time, but to just sort of float an approach to ensuring everyone has the same understanding of what went well, what didn't go well, what's still to be done.
Thanks. Peter?
There was some desire to have regular updates on the work of the school construction working group, which I'd be happy to provide. However, if Jill Briggs Campbell from AOE happens to be in the room at our next commission meeting, she'll be better equipped.
Yeah, I think that would be good to bring into the conversation.
Great. The other thing go ahead.
I was just saying, similarly, the pre-K committee is going to be making recommendations to the General Assembly in December, and the group reconvened to provide feedback on an initial draft of that report. So it might be helpful to get an update from the construction working group and also the pre-K committee, just so that we have a holistic view of what recommendations might be put forward.
That's helpful. Zoe, what's the best way? I am happy to reach out as the chair to those folks, or is that something that tell me the best way to make that happen. I think it's a good idea.
What do you think the best way? I guess now I'm the co-chair. I guess now I'm the co-chair of that. So we can coordinate.
Okay. I think that makes sense. It's sort of like not to say that a lot of the agenda is updates, but I do think a lot of the agenda is updates. And so it's the updates from the various early input sessions that have happened.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think both of these committees in many ways are going to be leaning on the commission in some respects to understand, well, what is the holistic recommendation and how do these segments fit into that? So I think it's a very healthy two-way conversation as well. So it's not just update, it's also for them to hear what are the considerations that the commission at large is grappling with as we think about our overall education system.
Great, thank you. Jennifer.
Maybe not for our October meeting, but at what point are we going to start consulting with all of the organizations that are listed in Act 183?
I can give you a really brief update from the engagement committee today. So essentially right now, the biggest turnaround is the RFP for a communication consultant who can keep the work moving on the engagement plan. The group also then said, well, what would an engagement session look like in October? We will have a small version of one, even though we won't have a consultant by then, and that we think that's appropriate. And so in a similar vein, I think that committee will keep that conversation going even while we're waiting for input. So, so in answer to each of those groups, that's probably a next agenda item for that group. They started with, let's get the RFP moving and let's get this first engagement session moving. In very short order, we now need to pull those in, some of whom are the two groups that we just shared. Right. So
Right.
we
That's
sort
what
of
made me-
need that. Yeah.
That's what made me think of it, but thank you.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
Okay. We are coming to the end of our time, and I see two hands in the audience, which I suspect is folks wanting public comment. Is there anything else before we adjourn?
No, I'm just going to have to cut out because I have to get to Brook Road to look at flood damage.
Great. Thanks, Anne.
Okay.
All
My
right.
apologies,
And
I have to cut out too.
I'm here another minute or two, but
Wait,
thanks, Zoe. And then just
Thank
really
you.
quickly, logistically, Suzanne and Maureen, I'll connect with you all. I think the biggest thing on my mind is just change the date of the 21st so we can get that out on the radar.
Yes, understood.
Um,
I'll do that as soon as I can after the meeting.
Perfect. So I have two, we'll move into public comment. I see two hands. Before I start with Elaine, is there anyone else from the public that wants to raise their hand and be in the queue? Okay, so not yet. Elaine, your screen says Elaine Bellavance. You can identify yourself and
Yes,
ahead.
hello, my name is Elaine Bellavance. I live in Walden. I'm a former school board member, but I still follow the budgeting process. And this has come up a couple different times. One of the meetings you had early on, Nicole made a reference to how are other budgets built in other towns. And today, Nicole mentioned several items, issues, if you will, that are at the core of budget building. So having said that, I think another issue to be on the agenda, if you agree, I mean, just a suggestion, is how are the supervisory union budgets built and voted on in other towns, in other school districts? Our supervisory union makes their budget a few weeks or months before the school budget is created. And that budget is voted on by 15 people, 15. And this is a multi-million-dollar budget. And therefore, that budget is broken up among 3 school districts upon which we, the residents, have no vote on. And I wondered if you could also add that to your list to look at in financing budgets.
Thanks, Elaine. Elizabeth Burrows.
Hi, thank you. For full disclosure, I'm also a legislator and a school board and supervisory union board member. I just wondered whether there was going to be a point at which you take into account what other states are doing. Because I haven't heard that mentioned, although I got on the meeting late today. I don't know whether it was mentioned today or not, but it might be helpful to know what best practices are all across our great nation. Thanks.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I know we don't normally respond to public comment. I just wanted to acknowledge that, yes, that is part of the conversation. It's been brought up a few different times. So Zoe mentioned it this morning in terms of other options. And so, yes. Any other members of the public? like to speak to the steering group? Okay, I think that we are good. We have at least the agenda items. Not exactly sure how we'll facilitate them, but thanks everyone for your discussion. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Thanks, Jennifer. Second. Nicole. All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Hi.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate
Thank you
your
very
time.
much, Megan.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye now.
bye, everyone.